Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It is February 14th, 2023. Happy Valentine's Day. All right. We are in the Old Testament, and we are going to read from the book of Genesis, chapter 41. We're going to read verse 1 to 36. All right, so we said this story of Joseph way back a couple of days ago. It's again, the story of God and his relationship with us and trying to restore that. That's basically what this whole Old Testament is for us as a Christian. Give us an idea of who God is and how we're supposed to relate to him. We had Abraham and Isaac, which we had the first covenant being formed there, and we wanted obedience. Well, I guess Noah too, and some obedience, but we didn't have some trust, so we worked on some trust issues. We had Jacob, so we wanted some honesty and some character issues, and we are now here with Joseph, and we need some humility here. Okay, and where's our lesson of humility? Well, we get these three dreams, interpretations of dreams. The first one we got a couple of days ago. He dreamed about the sheaves bending down to him, and he understood that meant he was going to rule over his brothers, and the first thing he wanted to do was go run and brag. Oh, I am going to be great. God says you guys are all going to bow down. So no humility at all. He's just bragging and full of himself because God showed him that revelation in that dream. That dream didn't lead to the power that he thought he was going to go. In fact, he ended up being sold as a slave by his brothers, being put in jail, where he languished until, well, yesterday's reading, the one right before this, where he encounters two prisoners in the jail, and they have a dream. You can see that humility of Joseph is much lower in this one, because now it's all about, hey, yes, God can show me, God will tell you what that dream meant. It all comes from God. He tells them what it means, but we get humility, not humbleness, because right at the end of that, he tells them, hey, you know what? When you go out of here and those dreams come true, he doesn't tell them to remember God. He says, remember me. Remember who told you. So he's still trying to impose himself on there, still trying to make dream interpretation that he's doing something. They forget to, the one who survives, the cupbearer, forgets to tell anyone, and Joseph continues the language in jail. All right, and then the humility starts to turn to the humbleness, and now he starts to accept that, hey, you know what, I need to be satisfied with where I am and do what God wants me to do, and let God decide what's going to happen after that. Now Pharaoh calls him up. That's where we get into this, and you see a much different Joseph as he comes to him and says, you know what, God, you have a dream. God can tell you what this dream is. Leaves himself out of that. In fact, we get a really good example of that, because after he tells God that this dream means famine is coming and he needs to be prepared, he also lets him know that, hey, and God is going to tell you how do you need to be prepared. You need to go find somebody who's trustworthy and honest and put them in charge of everything. Well, that Joseph from the very first dream would have been saying, hey, pick me, you got to pick me, you got to pick me. The Joseph for the prison dreams, again, would have said, well, these are all the things you need to do, and if you really want someone who's good at it, it's me. But we see Joseph in this section, hey, he's just telling him what God says. This is who God says you need to find. Someone who's good and honest, and put him in charge of everything and trust him to do what's right. And he just leaves it in God's hand, and God lets Pharaoh know, hey, that guy that's talking to you, that's the guy you need to put in charge, and we'll get to that tomorrow. But for us right now, we're going to read Genesis chapter 41, verse 1 through 36, and we're going to look at Joseph finally learn that lesson that humbleness is where we need to be. That's when God's going to lift us up. So then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass just as he interpreted for us. So it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there was no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadows. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt. Such ugliness I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads, withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them, and the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. And the dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh. And let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. May God bless the reading of his word. May God bless you. Bye.